Gunfire shattered the sterile quiet of the emergency ward, echoing off linoleum floors. Most people freeze when death kicks down the door. Cheyenne Heath didn't. She adjusted her scrubs over her wide hips, grabbed a scalpel, and decided nobody was dying on her shift, not even a ruthless mob boss. Midnight at the Kensington Private Medical Facility in downtown Chicago was usually reserved for the quiet elite politicians, drying out socialites, recovering from discreet cosmetic procedures, and corporate giants suffering from stress-induced heart palpitations. Cheyenne Heath preferred the graveyard shift. It meant fewer arrogant doctors barking orders and fewer judgmental stares from the impeccably thin, polished daytime nursing staff. Cheyenne was a fat woman, a reality she neither hid from nor apologized for. Standing 5'7" and weighing 260 pounds, she took up space in a world that constantly demanded women shrink themselves. Her size 22 scrubs were practical, stretched comfortably over her broad hips and thick thighs. While society often equated her weight with weakness or laziness, Cheyenne knew the truth. Her body was a machine built for endurance. She could perform chest compressions for 30 minutes straight without losing rhythm, and she could roll a 200-pound unconscious patient on her own to prevent bed sores. She was grounded sturdy and highly competent. The tranquil hum of the cardiac monitors in the Harrison wing was violently interrupted at 1:14 a.m. The heavy reinforced double doors of the private loading dock burst open, crashing against the wall with a deafening metallic clang. 3 men in ruined high-end Italian suits stormed into the corridor. They were dragging a 4th man between them. He was a massive, imposing figure, though currently slumping and leaving a gruesome dark trail across the pristine white tiles. "We need a doctor now," the lead man bellowed, brandishing a customized Sig Sauer, P226. His eyes were wild, scanning the empty nurse's station. Cheyenne stepped out of room 104, a patient chart in her thick, capable hands. She didn't flinch at the sight of the firearm. Working in a private, off-the-books clinic meant she had seen worse than panicked men with guns. "Put that away before you shoot an oxygen tank and blow us all to hell," Cheyenne ordered, her voice cutting through the panic with the authority of a seasoned trauma nurse. She marched toward them, her heavy rubber-soled clogs squeaking against the tile. The armed man blinked clearly, taken aback by the stern reprimand from the large, unassuming woman in floral scrubs. He lowered the weapon slightly. "Are you deaf, lady? Get a doctor. The boss is dying. Dr. Miller is on call, but he's asleep in the East Wing, and by the time he gets down here, your boss will be dead," Cheyenne stated flatly, stepping up to the injured man. The man bleeding out was Daxton Griffin. Even pale and gasping for air, he radiated a dangerous, commanding aura. His dark hair was matted with sweat, and his sharp, patrician features were contorted in agony. He had taken a high-caliber round straight to the upper chest, just below the clavicle, and another to his side. Daxton was the undisputed head of the Griffin Syndicate, a man who controlled half the shipping ports on the eastern seaboard. Tonight, a scheduled meeting in a private warehouse off Rush Street had turned into an ambush. Lamar Costa, his trusted underboss, had sold him out. Daxton's heavy-lidded eyes fluttered open as Cheyenne reached for his ruined tailored shirt, producing a pair of trauma shears from her pocket to cut away the expensive fabric. He looked up at her, his vision blurring. He saw her double chin, the thick arms reaching for him, the roundness of her face. In his world, strength was lean muscle, sharp angles, and ruthless efficiency. "Get her away from me," Daxton ground out, coughing up a fleck of crimson. "Not some fat nurse. Get a real doctor." The guards hesitated, looking between Cheyenne and their bleeding boss. Cheyenne didn't miss a beat. She didn't flush with embarrassment or step away. She simply gripped the collar of his ruined shirt and sliced through the silk with a sharp, aggressive, tearing sound. "Listen to me, tough guy," Cheyenne said, leaning in so her face was inches from his. "Your trachea is deviating to the left, and your neck veins are bulging. You have a tension pneumothorax. That means air is trapped in your chest cavity, crushing your lung and pushing against your heart. In about 3 minutes, your heart will stop completely. I am the only person in this building right now who knows exactly where to stick a needle to let that air out. So you can either shut up and let this fat nurse save your miserable life, or you can bleed out on this linoleum while your goons watch. Choose." Daxton stared at her, stunned by the sheer, unadulterated steel in her eyes. He gave a microscopic, breathless nod before his eyes rolled back. "Get him on the trauma gurney. Now." Cheyenne roared, her previous calm transforming into explosive action. The men complied immediately, hoisting Daxton onto the bed. Cheyenne moved with a startling fluid speed that defied their expectations of a woman her size. She didn't run running in a hospital-caused panic, but she power-walked with immense purpose. She slammed the emergency button on the wall to summon the surgical team, then ripped open a sterile kit. "Hold him down," she commanded the man with the gun. "When I do this, his body is going to violently react." Cheyenne located the second intercostal space on Daxton's right chest, right at the mid-clavicular line. She took a massive 14-gauge needle, took a deep breath, and drove it directly into his chest wall. A sharp hiss of trapped air escaped, sounding like a punctured tire. Daxton's body spasmed wildly on the gurney, his back arching off the mattress as oxygen finally flooded his remaining functional lung. His heart rate, previously plummeting on the monitor she had hastily hooked up, stabilized. "He needs surgery right now to repair the artery," Cheyenne said, wiping a bead of sweat from her forehead as Dr. Miller finally burst through the doors, looking disheveled and panicked. "What happened?" Dr. Miller gasped. "Gunshot wounds, chest and abdomen. I decompressed a tension and pneumothorax. He's prepped. Get him to OR1. Cheyenne rattled off, stepping back to give the surgical team room as they swarmed the bed and whisked Daxton away. One of Daxton's men, a tall enforcer named Leo, lingered behind. He looked at the discarded bloody needle, then at Cheyenne, who was already calmly wiping down the tray. "You saved his life," Leo said, his voice laced with shock. "It's my job," Cheyenne replied without looking up. "Now go wash your hands. You're tracking mud and viscera all over my floor." 4 hours later, the hospital was quiet again. Daxton Griffin lay in the Baxter Suite, the most secure VIP recovery room in the Kensington facility. He was hooked up to a morphine drip, 2 IV lines, and a heart monitor. The surgery had been successful, but he was incredibly weak, his muscular body sapped of its usual vitality. Cheyenne sat in the corner of the dim room, bathed in the blue glow of her tablet as she charted his vitals. She was eating a powdered donut, quietly enjoying the sugar rush after the adrenaline dump of the night. Daxton opened his eyes, the heavy fog of anesthesia slowly lifting. The pain in his chest was a dull, throbbing ache. He turned his head slowly and watched her. She was oblivious to his waking humming, softly to a song playing through one of her earbuds. He remembered what he had said to her in the hallway. He remembered the fierce, unapologetic fire in her eyes when she told him he was dying. "You didn't take my advice." Daxton rasped his voice, raw and gravelly. Cheyenne stopped chewing and looked up. She swallowed, wiped the powdered sugar from her fingers with a napkin, and stood up, walking over to his bedside to check his IV line. "My advice was for you to shut up, and clearly you didn't take mine either," she retorted dryly, checking his pulse manually. Her fingers were warm and soft against his clammy wrist. Daxton let out a breath that was half sigh, half chuckle, which ended in a grimace of pain. "I insulted you. I've been insulted by people far more articulate than a mobster bleeding out on a loading dock," Cheyenne said, adjusting his blanket. "I know what I look like, Mr. Griffin. I also know I'm damn good at what I do. You're alive because I have quick hands and a thick skin, literally and figuratively." Daxton studied her face. There was no vanity in her, no desperate need for approval. She was entirely self-possessed. It was a rare trait in his world where everyone was constantly posturing for power. "Thank you," he said quietly. It was a phrase Daxton Griffin rarely uttered. Before Cheyenne could respond, a sharp, suppressed thwip sounded from the hallway outside, followed by the heavy thud of a body hitting the floor. Daxton's eyes widened, instantly alert. The morphine fog vanished, replaced by the primal instincts of a man who had survived 35 years in the underworld. "Lamar," he hissed. "He found me." Cheyenne froze, listening. Another heavy thud, the distinct sound of footsteps, too heavy, too deliberate to be hospital staff, echoed outside the heavy oak door of the suite. "Your men," Cheyenne whispered. "Dead," Daxton replied grimly, struggling to push himself up. He hissed in agony, his fresh incisions screaming in protest. "They used a silencer. You need to run. Now. Hit the alarm on your way out." "They'll shoot anyone they see," Cheyenne said, her mind racing. "And if I run, they'll walk in here and finish the job." "I am a dead man anyway," Daxton grunted, falling back onto the pillows, gasping for air. "Go, hide." "I didn't work for 3 hours keeping your heart beating just to let some thugs stop it." Cheyenne snapped, her fear hardening into resolve. She moved to the door and locked the heavy deadbolt. It wouldn't hold them forever, but it would buy them seconds. She turned back to Daxton. "Can you walk?" "No," he admitted. "Good thing I lift heavy," Cheyenne muttered. She stripped the IV lines from his arms, pressing a piece of gauze to the bleeding sites. "Get your good arm around my neck." Daxton looked at her like she was insane. "I weigh 220 pounds of dead weight right now. You can't carry me." "Watch me." Cheyenne leaned over the bed, wedging her shoulder under his uninjured armpit. She planted her wide stance, engaging her thick, powerful legs, and hauled him upward. Daxton groaned loudly as he was pulled to his feet, leaning entirely against her. To his absolute shock, she didn't buckle. A petite, slender nurse would have collapsed under his mass, but Cheyenne's broad frame absorbed his weight like a load-bearing pillar. She braced her heavy arm around his waist, locking him to her hip. "We are going through the bathroom," Cheyenne whispered, fiercely, practically dragging him forward. "There's an adjoining door to the utility corridor. They use it for removing medical waste discreetly from the VIP suites." Just as they slipped into the bathroom, a deafening blast shattered the lock on the main door. Splinters flew as 3 heavily armed men burst into the room. "Check the bathroom," one of them barked. Cheyenne hauled Daxton through the secondary door, locking it behind them and stepping into the narrow, unlit utility corridor. It smelled strongly of bleach and dirty linens. She pulled him along, her breathing heavy sweat breaking out on her forehead. The physical exertion was immense, but her legs pumped like pistons, carrying them both away from the immediate threat. "You're surprisingly strong." Daxton panted his head, resting against her thick shoulder, smelling the faint scent of vanilla and antiseptic on her scrubs. "I carry the weight of a grown man every day just existing," Cheyenne whispered, back her chest heaving as they navigated the dark hallway. "Adding you is just a minor workout." They reached the end of the corridor, which opened up into the basement maintenance level, but as Cheyenne pushed the heavy fire door open, The harsh fluorescent light revealed a man in a black tactical vest standing by the elevator banks. He turned, leveling a suppressed submachine gun at them. "Griffin!" The hitman sneered, raising the weapon. Daxton tried to push Cheyenne away to shield her, but he couldn't even stand on his own. Cheyenne didn't scream. She didn't cower. Next to the door was a massive industrial-sized full cylinder of compressed oxygen weighing nearly 60 pounds. With a guttural yell, Cheyenne let go of Daxton, allowing him to slide down the wall. She grabbed the heavy steel cylinder by the neck, spun, and hurled it with every ounce of force in her broad shoulders directly at the gunman. The heavy tank acted like a battering ram, slamming into the hitman's chest before he could pull the trigger. The sheer force knocked the wind out of him, throwing him backward into the brick wall with a sickening crunch. His gun clattered across the concrete floor. Before the man could recover, Cheyenne surged forward. She didn't bother looking for a weapon. She simply threw her entire 260 pounds onto him, driving her knee directly into his sternum. The impact was devastating. The assassin gasped, his ribs cracking under her immense, unyielding weight, and he blacked out instantly. Cheyenne stood up slowly, her chest heaving, her scrubs damp with sweat. She kicked the submachine gun far out of reach, then turned back to look at the Mafia Boss, slumped against the wall. Daxton Griffin, the most feared man in Chicago, stared at the chubby, exhausted nurse with a mixture of absolute awe and a budding, intense fascination. "Like I said," Cheyenne panted, pushing a stray lock of sweaty hair behind her ear. "I lift heavy." Keys jingled in the dead hitman's tactical vest. Cheyenne didn't hesitate. She knelt beside the unconscious assassin, her thick fingers deftly fishing out a heavy key fob adorned with the Chevrolet logo. She also grabbed a spare magazine and tossed it to Daxton, who caught it with his good hand, his eyes wide, with a mixture of disbelief and mounting respect. "Can you walk now, or do I need to carry you like a sack of potatoes again?" She asked, her voice trembling only slightly. Adrenaline was a hell of a drug, but she knew the crash was coming. "I can manage," Daxton gritted out, using the concrete wall to push himself upright. They limped into the underground parking garage. The black Chevrolet Tahoe sat in the corner, heavily tinted and armored. Cheyenne shoved Daxton into the passenger seat, ignoring his groans as his fresh stitches pulled taut. She climbed into the driver's seat, adjusting it back to accommodate her hips, and slammed her foot on the gas. The heavy SUV roared to life, tearing out of the Kensington facility, just as sirens began to wail in the distance. "Where to?" she demanded, eyes locked on the road. "I can't take you to a public hospital, and going to the police means I'll likely end up in a landfill by sunrise." "Lincoln Park," Daxton instructed his head, lolling against the leather headrest. "Take Fullerton Avenue. There's a private brownstone registered to a shell company. Code to the garage is 0499. The drive was tense, the silence only broken by the rumble of the engine and Daxton's ragged breathing. When they arrived at the opulent multi-million-dollar brownstone, Cheyenne pulled into the subterranean garage and immediately shut the engine off. She helped him inside, dragging his heavy frame up the stairs and into a sprawling living room that looked straight out of an Architectural Digest spread. Persian rugs covered the hardwood, and a massive baccarat crystal chandelier hung from the vaulted ceiling. "Sit," Cheyenne commanded, guiding him to a pristine white leather sofa. She didn't care about the blood seeping through his bandages and staining the expensive furniture. She vanished into the kitchen and returned moments later with a bottle of Grey Goose vodka, a roll of duct tape, and a clean dish towel. She had snagged a rudimentary trauma kit from the hospital basement before their escape, but it was limited. "Drink," she ordered, shoving the bottle into his uninjured hand. "I need to check your chest tube and redress the wounds. That run probably tore your sutures." Daxton took a long, burning pull from the bottle, his dark eyes never leaving her face. He watched in silence as she pulled up a chair. She wasn't delicate. Her hands were large, capable, and commanded the space they occupied. She moved with an innate confidence, peeling back the bloody gauze to inspect the damage. "You're a long way from the emergency ward, Cheyenne," Daxton murmured, noting the name stitched onto her scrub top. "And you're a long way from being out of the woods, Griffin," she shot back, pouring a generous splash of vodka over his side. Daxton hissed, his muscles jumping under her hands. As she leaned in close to tape the new dressing, the scent of her enveloped him, clean linen, sharp antiseptic, and the sweet, warm smell of the powdered doughnut she had eaten earlier. Her breast brushed against his uninjured arm, soft and full, and for a fleeting second, the ruthless Mafia Boss felt a sharp, unexpected twist of desire. In his world, women were curated, starved into sample sizes, and paraded like trophies. They were brittle. Cheyenne was a fortress. "Why didn't you run?" he asked softly, the harshness completely gone from his voice. "When the shooting started, you had no obligation to me." Cheyenne paused, pressing the tape down securely. She looked up, her gaze locking with his. "Because I don't run from bullies. I've spent my entire life dealing with people who look at my size and assume I'm weak, slow, or cowardly. I learned a long time ago that if you want to survive in this world, you stand your ground. You plant your feet, and you don't let anyone move you." Daxton reached up with his good hand, his thumb brushing against her soft, round cheek. She didn't pull away. "I thought you were just another casualty." Daxton confessed, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "I looked at you in that hallway and I judged you. I was wrong. You are the strongest woman I have ever met." A faint blush crept up Cheyenne's neck, tinting her cheeks. Nobody had ever called her strong as a compliment. It was usually an insult, a way of saying she was masculine or imposing. But Daxton said it like it was the most intoxicating trait a woman could possess. The tender moment was violently shattered by the shrill beep of the brownstone security system. The perimeter alarm flashed red on the digital panel near the foyer. Someone had breached the front gate. Daxton's romantic gaze instantly hardened into the cold, dead stare of a killer. "The Tahoe," he growled. Lamar's men must have had a fleet tracker on it. They followed the GPS signal. "How many?" Cheyenne asked, dropping the medical supplies and stepping back. "Lamar wouldn't come with less than 6, Daxton said, forcing himself up from the couch. He moved to an ornate oak bookshelf, pulling a specific volume that triggered a hidden mechanism. The shelf swung open, revealing a steel-reinforced weapons cache. He pulled out a Glock 19 and a short-barreled Remington 870 shotgun, racking a shell into the chamber with a menacing clack. He handed the Glock to Cheyenne. She stared at the matte black weapon in her hands. "I save lives, Mr. Griffin. I don't take them. Tonight you do both, or we don't live to see tomorrow." Daxton stated, his face pale and sweating. "There is a panic room down the hall, behind the mirror in the master bedroom. Go. Lock yourself in." "Not a chance," Cheyenne said, gripping the heavy pistol. Her hand shook slightly, but her jaw was set. "I didn't drag your heavy ass out of a hospital just to let you get shot in your own living room. I'm your medic. I stay close." Before Daxton could argue, the front door exploded inward, splintered wood raining across the foyer. The heavy thud of combat boots hit the hardwood floor. "Sweep the ground floor!" Lamar Costa's voice echoed through the house, slick and arrogant. "He's bleeding out. He won't put up much of a fight." Daxton shoved Cheyenne behind a thick marble pillar, just as automatic gunfire shredded the living room. The baccarat chandelier shattered, raining thousands of razor-sharp crystal shards over the Persian rugs. Daxton leaned out, firing the shotgun single-handed. The booming roar of the weapon was deafening in the enclosed space, followed by the wet thud of a body dropping in the hallway. "Daxton," Lamar mocked from the kitchen. "It's over, old man. Your era is finished. The families want new blood." "Then come bleed for them, Lamar," Daxton roared back. He tried to shift his weight to reload the shotgun, but his injured side gave out. He stumbled, collapsing heavily against the marble pillar, his face grey with agonizing pain. The shotgun clattered to the floor out of his reach. Cheyenne watched in horror as Lamar stepped into the living room, an arrogant smirk plastered across his perfectly groomed face. He had a custom 1911 pistol aimed directly at Daxton's head. Such a tragic end to the great Griffin Empire. Lamar sneered, stepping closer. He didn't even notice the large woman trembling in the shadows just 3 feet to his right. Cheyenne didn't have time to aim the Glock. She didn't trust herself to shoot straight anyway. But she knew physics. She knew mass and momentum. She looked down. Next to the pillar was a heavy, solid bronze sculpture of a rearing horse, easily weighing 40 pounds. It was a decorative piece meant to project power and wealth. To Cheyenne, it was a weapon. With a primal scream that tore from the depths of her chest, Cheyenne dropped the gun, hoisted the heavy bronze statue with both hands, and lunged out from behind the pillar. Lamar snapped his head toward the noise, his eyes widening in shock at the sight of the massive, furious woman charging him. He swung his gun toward her, but he was a fraction of a second too late. Cheyenne brought the heavy bronze statue down with crushing force, slamming it directly into Lamar's right shoulder and collarbone. The sickening sound of snapping bone echoed through the room. Lamar screamed, his pistol flying from his hand as he crumpled to his knees, his entire right side paralyzed by the blow. The sheer momentum of her swing carried Cheyenne forward, and she didn't try to stop. She used her full 260 pounds to crash into him, like a freight train driving him flat against the hardwood floor. She pinned his uninjured arm under her heavy knee, locking him down completely. Daxton didn't hesitate. Breathing heavily, he dragged himself forward, picked up Lamar's dropped 1911, and pressed the hot barrel directly to the traitor's forehead. "You forgot one thing about my empire, Lamar." Daxton whispered, his voice dripping with lethal promise. "I don't die easily." He pulled the trigger. The deafening crack silenced Lamar forever. Cheyenne flinched, closing her eyes tight, but she didn't move off the body until Daxton gently reached out and placed a warm, blood-stained hand on her shoulder. "It's over, Cheyenne," he said softly. Just then, the screech of tires echoed from the street, followed by the heavy, coordinated footsteps of Daxton's loyal enforcers, led by Leo. They flooded the house, weapons drawn only to stop dead in their tracks at the sight before them. The living room was destroyed. Lamar and 2 of his men were dead. And sitting on the floor amidst the ruin, breathing heavily and looking completely unfazed, was the chubby nurse from the clinic, while their fearsome boss leaned against her for support. "Boss," Leo breathed, lowering his weapon. "We got your SOS from the burner. The rest of Lamar's crew are dealt with. Clean this up," Daxton ordered wearily. He looked down at Cheyenne. She was covered in dust sweat and other people's blood. Her floral scrubs were ruined. She looked exhausted, her broad shoulders slumping under the weight of the adrenaline leaving her system. "You need to sit down," Daxton said, his hand sliding from her shoulder to cup her cheek, ignoring his men who were pointedly looking anywhere but at their boss showing affection. "I need a nap, a shower, and a dozen donuts," Cheyenne muttered, allowing him to help her up, though she was still the one doing most of the supporting. Daxton chuckled a genuine deep sound that warmed the cold room. He pulled her flush against his chest, heedless of the pain in his ribs. He looked at her round face, her fierce eyes, her unapologetic curves. She had saved his life twice in one night. She was a force of nature, a heavy, unmovable mountain that had shielded him from the storm. "You can have whatever you want, Cheyenne," Daxton murmured, leaning in until his lips brushed against hers. It was a promise sealed in the blood and chaos of his world. "Because you are never going back to the graveyard shift again. You belong to me now, and I take care of the people who protect my throne." Cheyenne smiled, finally leaning her weight into him, knowing his empire was strong, but she was stronger. "I guess I can make an exception for a mob boss, but I still expect you to eat your vegetables." If you were captivated by Cheyenne and Daxton's thrilling story of unexpected love survival and defying all odds, don't forget to hit that like button. We release gripping, heart-pounding romance dramas just like this every single week. Share this video with your friends who love a fierce, unapologetic heroine and a bad boy mafia boss who finally meets his match. Subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss out on our next romance adventure.